We rejected both offers. By late afternoon, Martin and the other director asked to negotiate without Carla in the room. They were not admitting every allegation, but they understood the financial direction of the case. Defending the installation would require them to explain why the approved poles were deleted, why my consent was never obtained, why a non-engineered sketch carried Dana's logo, and why the system was reactivated after her written warning. The final terms took another 3 hours. Silver Pines agreed to remove all 4 fixtures, brackets, conduit, timer equipment, and connections within 10 days. The removal had to be supervised by licensed electrical and building envelope contractors. The wall would be opened where necessary, photographed, repaired with matching brick and mortar, and inspected before the interior rack was reinstalled. The HOA agreed to pay the full $52,640 within 30 days. It also agreed that any future court lighting would use the original freestanding pole locations and the clubhouse electrical service unless a new sealed design and permit approved another option entirely on HOA property. Most important to me, the settlement would be entered as a consent judgment. Its permanent injunction prohibited Silver Pines, its officers, managers, and contractors from entering my land, attaching equipment to my structures, or using my utilities without written permission. The drainage easement remained valid for its actual purpose, so the HOA could still maintain the underground stormwater line within the described southern corridor after proper notice. Nothing broader was created. Carla signed for the association after the board representatives authorized the agreement. I signed after Rachel checked the payment schedule, repair standard, inspection rights, and enforcement language one final time. There was no applause. The mediator collected the signature pages, and I carried the binders back to my truck. The wall was still damaged, and the lights were still there. But for the first time, every responsibility was written beside the party that had created it. The engineering records had not erased the bill. They had shifted it to Silver Pines. 10 days later, a lift rolled up my gravel drive beneath a gray morning sky. This time, it had come to take the stadium lights down. The removal crew began by isolating the unauthorized circuit and documenting the service panel before touching the wall. The lift rose slowly to the upper brackets, and one by one, the 4 black fixtures came down. Without them, the workshop looked strangely bare. Pale rectangles marked the brick where the steel plates had blocked months of sun, and each anchor left a dark opening rimmed with red dust. The building envelope contractor removed damaged bricks around the worst penetrations and opened a narrow section of the interior wall. Dana's concern had been justified. Water had followed 2 upper fasteners through the torn weather barrier, dampening insulation and staining the wood sheathing. The framing remained sound, but covering the exterior holes alone would never have stopped the hidden moisture. Over the next week, the contractor replaced the damaged barrier, installed proper flashing where repairs required it, dried the cavity, and reset matching salvaged bricks with mortar, blended to the original color. A licensed electrician removed the added timer, junction box, and cable, restored my service configuration, and completed a final inspection. The restoration company photographed every layer before closing the wall, exactly as the consent judgment required. When I moved the walnut rack back into place, there was no conduit above it and no damp smell behind the boards. My meter returned to its ordinary evening pattern. For the first time since the installation, I could shut off the workshop and know that nothing outside was still drawing power through it. Silver Pines eventually built the 2 freestanding poles from Dana's original design. They stood 86 feet inside the recreation field, fed by underground conduit from Panel C in the clubhouse. Their shields directed the light onto the courts instead of through my windows, and a programmed cutoff turned them off at a reasonable hour. The solution saw the 2 and tame 2 and the fuation. The first fresh post hole was still damp when my surveyor lowered his measuring rod into it and told me not to touch anything else. 21 more holes crossed my horse pasture in a ruler straight line, each surrounded by dark soil and boot prints. 30 feet east, my original cedar posts lay stacked beside the wire the HOA's contractor had removed that morning. Dana Whitlock arrived before we finished documenting the second hole. She pointed at the subdivision map on her tablet. "Your fence was inside our trail corridor." I did not argue with the colored line on her screen. My surveyor located 2 recorded corner monuments, established the deed boundary, and measured the offset. Every new post hole landed within 2 inches of a line, exactly 30 feet inside my land. That was not a crooked fence being corrected. It was a planned relocation. The contractor had left numbered depth tags beside several holes, giving us a crew identifier and same-day timeline. Dana's expression changed when my surveyor photographed them beside his coordinates. But the larger surprise was not where the HOA had moved my fence. Their preliminary trail map showed a route connecting 2 subdivisions across a strip the board had never owned or received permission to use. That was when the damage stopped looking like a careless fencing job. My name is Caleb Morgan. I was 52 and had trained horses at Red Willow Farm for nearly 19 years. That morning had started with Juniper, my chestnut mare, trotting past the equipment shed where she had no business being. Her lead rope was gone, the barn gate was latched, and then I heard the hydraulic growl of a post auger beyond the east pasture. By the time I reached it, the crew had removed the cedar posts from a long section of fence and rolled the wire beside their trailer. Juniper had slipped through the open line before anyone noticed. I moved her and the other horses into the smaller south paddock, then shut the farm lane so no equipment could leave before I recorded what had happened. The field supervisor, Nolan Pike, showed me an HOA work order on his phone. He looked less certain when I told him Red Willow Farm was not part of Saddle Creek Estates. Dana said the board owned the corridor, he replied. I asked him to stop drilling while ownership was checked. Nolan shut down the auger, instructed his crew to stand clear, and gave me the company's office number. I photographed the trailer plate, machinery, soil piles, removed fence materials, and every numbered tag without stepping into the holes. Miguel Santos arrived 40 minutes later with his field equipment and copies of the boundary records he had pulled before leaving his office. While he began locating the monuments, I installed temporary livestock panels far enough from the disturbed line to leave the evidence untouched. Nolan finally emailed me the first page of his job packet. Across the top, above Dana's authorization, were 3 words I had never seen before: Saddle Loop Connector. The name made the route on Dana's tablet look less like an old planning mistake and more like an active construction project. The question was no longer whether they had moved my fence. It was why the HOA had ordered the work before proving it possessed any right to the land beneath those fresh holes. By sundown, the temporary panels had turned the south paddock into a cramped holding area. Juniper kept circling the gate, and the 3 client horses beside her were too close together for the conditioning work scheduled that week. None of them had been hurt, but that was luck, not planning. A horse could cover 30 feet before a person finished shouting its name. Red Willow Farm covered 38 acres of rolling pasture, a hayfield, 2 barns, and a narrow wooded drainage on the west side. The eastern boundary was different. It ran straight between 2 iron monuments and separated my working pasture from Saddle Creek Estates. The subdivision had been built in 2 sections, one northeast of the farm and one southeast. My land filled the gap between them. That gap was precisely what Dana wanted. When I bought the farm nearly 19 years earlier, the southern HOA section did not exist. The seller walked the eastern line with me, using the recorded survey referenced in my deed. The cedar fence had been installed on that line soon afterward, with its corner posts set a few inches inside my property so there could be no argument about ownership. I had replaced wire and braces over the years, but the alignment had never moved. The disputed section measured 252 feet. Shifting it 30 feet west would take approximately 7,560 square feet from the usable pasture and create a clean passage between the HOA's 2 sections. On a map, that strip looked small. From the saddle, it was the turning lane my students used when teaching a young horse to slow down without crowding the rail. The following morning, I called the owners of the 3 boarded horses. I told them the fence had been removed without permission and that I would move their animals to a nearby stable until I could provide a secure enclosure. I paid the transport and boarding deposits myself. I also canceled 4 training sessions and began a separate log for every expense and lost appointment. Dana's certified letter arrived before noon. It described the work as a correction of an encroaching agricultural fence and ordered me not to obstruct completion of the saddle loop connector. The letter said the corridor had appeared on the developer's equestrian access plan since the subdivision was proposed. It did not identify an easement book, page, instrument number, legal description, or deed transferring the strip to the HOA. The last paragraph warned that the board would seek reimbursement if my interference increased construction costs. I read it twice at the kitchen table, then placed it beside Nolan's emailed work order. Dana's letter called the project a correction. Nolan's document called it a relocation. One suggested the fence had wandered onto HOA property. The other instructed a crew to move an owner's fence exactly 30 feet west for trail access. I pulled the metal document box I kept in the office closet. Inside were my warranty deed, the survey referenced by the deed, the title policy from closing, and photographs taken during the first year I owned the farm. One photograph showed the newly built cedar fence running behind a row of young cottonwoods. The houses now belonging to the southern section of Saddle Creek Estates were not even there. The title policy listed utility rights near the road and a drainage easement along the western woods. It listed nothing benefiting Saddle Creek Estates across the east pasture. That did not answer every possible legal argument, but it made Dana's certainty difficult to understand. The disruption was already changing how the farm operated. The temporary panels could contain calm horses, but they were not suitable for lessons or rehabilitation work. Every additional day meant more boarding charges, canceled appointments, and an increasing risk that longtime clients would place their animals somewhere else. Miguel had treated his first visit as emergency documentation, not a complete boundary survey. I called him again and authorized the full work, recover the monuments, run the deed calls, map both fence alignments, calculate the affected area, and compare his field results with the recorded subdivision plat. Before we ended the call, he asked me to examine Dana's map closely. The colored trail line had no bearings, distances, recording stamp, or parcel reference. "It looks like a planning exhibit," he said. "Let's find out what was actually recorded." That distinction, between a route someone once drew and a right someone legally obtained, became the next thing we had to prove. Miguel returned 2 days later with a 2-person crew, a robotic total station, and enough flagging to make the east pasture look temporarily unfamiliar. The soil around the 22 holes had begun to dry, but the circular cuts were still sharp. We left the temporary panels where they were and kept every horse well south of the work. The northern monument took almost an hour to recover. It was an old iron pipe buried beneath grass and a layer of silt near the subdivision's drainage swale. The southern monument was a capped rebar beside the cottonwoods. Miguel checked both against the recorded survey, then ran the deed calls between them. HOA had avoided was the solution the approved records had specified from the beginning. The board completed its internal review after the consent judgment was entered. It formally censured Carla for changing the engineered design without owner permission, failing to obtain a board vote, and continuing the installation after receiving Dana's warning. Carla resigned as president. Martin Shaw became interim president and sent me a brief written apology that did not excuse the association's conduct or ask me to surrender any part of the injunction. Silver Pines paid the full $52,640 before the 30-day deadline. The money covered the restoration, electrical correction, power use, professional expenses, damaged material, business interruption, and the agreed contribution toward legal fees. I signed the completion acknowledgement only after Rachel reviewed the inspections and confirmed that every obligation had been performed. For once, no portion of that bill was left beside my name. The 12-foot drainage easement remained where it had always been, along the southern boundary. If the HOA ever needed to maintain that line, it would provide notice and stay inside the recorded corridor. The permanent injunction protected everything beyond it. I finished the 12-foot walnut dining table 2 weeks after reopening the workshop. As I applied the final coat, late sunlight crossed the east wall, without the hard white glare that had once filled the room. The repaired bricks were visible if I knew where to look. But the wall was dry, quiet, and mine again. The first drill bit had made the conflict feel immediate and personal. What ended it was less dramatic. Photographs, a deed, a survey, sealed plans, utility data, and people willing to place each fact in the right order. Carla had treated my workshop as the cheapest place to put 4 lights. The records showed why the cheapest shortcut became Silver Pine's responsibility. His crew first measured the locations where my original posts had stood. The old fence was not perfectly straight in the way a line drawn on a computer was straight, but its end posts and intermediate alignment remained several inches inside my property. Nothing crossed onto HOA land. Then they measured the new holes. From the first hole to the last, the drilled line extended 252 feet. Its center line remained 30 feet west of the recorded boundary, varying by less than 2 inches. The pattern enclosed approximately 7,560 square feet between the original fence and the proposed replacement. That figure matched the width shown on Nolan's work order. Miguel marked each hole on his field sketch and linked its number to the contractor tag we had photographed. The sequence ran north to south, exactly as Nolan's crew log described. The fresh holes did more than show disturbed soil. They preserved the dimensions, direction, and execution of the HOA's instruction on the ground. A mistaken repair would wander, Miguel said. This is an intentional offset. He was careful about what came next. His survey could locate the deed description, monuments, fence lines, and disturbed area. It could not decide whether the HOA possessed some separate legal right that had not been included in the papers I owned. That required a complete record search, and, if the HOA refused to agree, a legal determination. The next morning, I met him at the county recorder's office. We obtained certified copies of the final plats for both sections of Saddle Creek Estates, the developer's declarations, and every recorded instrument indexed against my parcel during the relevant years. The final plats showed streets, drainage areas, utility easements, common parcels, and walking paths inside the subdivision. At the point where Dana's proposed route reached Red Willow Farm, the recorded trail simply stopped. It resumed in the southern section, but no dashed corridor, access easement, or legal description crossed the gap between them. A title examiner named Rachel Kim reviewed the same chain independently. She found no deed conveying the disputed strip, no express trail easement benefiting the HOA, and no recorded agreement signed by a prior Red Willow owner. She warned me that title searches did not erase every claim someone might allege, but the public record did not support the ownership Dana had asserted. Miguel eventually located the document on Dana's tablet in a planning file maintained by the County Development Office. It was labeled Preliminary Landscape and Recreation Concept. The page had colored paths, tree symbols, and suggested amenities, but no recording stamp. A small notation near the proposed connector referenced coordination with the adjoining owner. The copy was too faint to read the complete sentence. That afternoon, I took the survey, deed records, title findings, photographs, work order, and Dana's letter to Laura Bennett, a property attorney recommended by Rachel. Laura spread the documents across a conference table and built a timeline before offering an opinion. She did not tell me I had already won. She said the physical and recorded evidence was strong, but the HOA needed a formal opportunity to identify whatever right it believed existed. She also wanted every email, board record, contractor instruction, and version of the planning map preserved before the dispute escalated. Laura sent Dana and the HOA's management company a cease and desist demand that evening. It prohibited further entry, requested restoration discussions, and demanded preservation of all saddle loop connector records. Attached were Miguel's preliminary survey exhibit and the title examiner's findings. Until the dispute was resolved, Laura advised me not to rebuild over the documented holes or discard any removed material. I extended the temporary panels, hired a night stable hand, and stored the original posts and wire under cover. Each precaution cost money, but it preserved both the horse's safety and the condition of the evidence. The HOA had 5 business days to respond. On the 4th day, a neighborhood announcement appeared online. On Tasterful, Dana informed residents that gravel for the connector would be delivered the following Monday and promised the trail would open within 2 weeks. The gravel truck appeared at 7:15 Monday morning, turning from the northern subdivision cul-de-sac toward the gap where my fence had stood. Its tires pressed white dust into the grass, and the raised bed carried enough crushed stone to build more than a temporary repair. I stayed on my side of the temporary panels and held up a copy of Laura's cease and desist letter. The driver stopped before crossing the surveyed boundary. He had been told the delivery area belonged to Saddle Creek Estates, but his ticket listed only Saddle Loop Connector, North Entrance. There was no parcel number or street address. I gave him Laura's number and asked him to call his dispatcher. 10 minutes later, he backed out without unloading a pound of gravel. Dana arrived as the truck reached the cul-de-sac. She accused me of obstructing a board-approved project and photographed me from the HOA side of the line. I photographed her, the truck, its delivery ticket, and the tire tracks. Neither of us stepped across the boundary. By lunch, Dana had posted a message to residents blaming an adjoining agricultural owner for delaying a recreational improvement funded by their dues. She described the trail as a feature promised when the community was developed. The message spread faster than Laura's letter ever could. Cars began slowing near the farm. 2 residents stood at the HOA fence taking pictures while I moved feed, and one asked why I had suddenly blocked a path their families had used for years. There had never been a path there. The original fence had remained closed for nearly 19 years. I kept my answers short and saved screenshots of every public statement. Arguing with residents would not restore the fence or establish title. Still, the pressure had a practical cost. A longtime client postponed bringing in 2 young horses after seeing Dana's post. Another canceled a month of lessons because she did not want her daughter riding near a property dispute. The nearby stable charged by the day, and my temporary night help added another line to the expense log. The temporary layout also changed the horse's routine. Juniper paced beside the panels whenever machinery moved in the subdivision, and I added braces each evening before dark. I could manage the risk for a few days, but a working farm could not operate indefinitely around an open boundary and a disputed construction zone. That Wednesday, Nolan Pike called me from his company office. Laura's preservation notice had reached his employer, and their manager was assembling the job records. Nolan sounded careful, but not evasive. He said Dana had personally approved the scope after he questioned the absence of survey stakes. The original electronic work order contained a revision history. The first version described installation of a 30-foot wide connector between the northern and southern trail systems. A later entry, added under Dana's account, instructed the crew to remove the owner's existing fence and relocate it 30 feet west. The final note said the HOA map would control placement and that no independent survey was required. Nolan also sent Laura the crew log. It identified the auger operator, arrival time, drilling sequence, and depth tag numbers. Those numbers matched the tags Miguel had plotted beside all 22 holes. The records connected Dana's authorization to the crew to the tags, and the tags to a measured line inside my property. I thought the board had already cleared the land rights, Nolan told me. If I'd known they hadn't, we would never have started. Laura told him to preserve the original digital files and let his company's counsel handle any formal statement. His cooperation helped, but she reminded me that a contractor could confirm what he had been ordered to do, not decide who legally owned the corridor. The first resident to contact me directly was Rebecca Sloan, who lived in the southern section and attended most board meetings. She did not claim to know the boundary. She simply thought Dana's message omitted too much. Rebecca forwarded the official meeting summaries distributed to homeowners during the previous 6 months. The earliest summary described the connector as a future concept requiring coordination with adjacent interests. 3 months later, Dana announced that the project was moving forward and said it would complete a continuous riding loop, improve property values, and support an application for regional recreation funding. No summary recorded a vote to purchase land, negotiate a license, or obtain an easement from me. The HOA's formal response arrived the next day through its management company. It rejected Laura's demand and claimed the connector reflected the developer's original intent. It also referred vaguely to historic maintenance access along the pasture edge. The letter named no person who had used that route, no dates, and no maintenance records. It did not explain why a supposedly existing corridor required my fence to be moved exactly 30 feet. Laura began preparing the complaint, but she still hoped the board might pause when it saw the evidence collected against its position. That hope ended on Friday morning. I found orange stakes marked Trail Kiel running beside the fresh post holes. Someone had placed them overnight, after the preservation demand and after the HOA received Miguel's survey exhibit. I photographed the stakes without removing them and sent the images to Laura. She called 5 minutes later. We filed today. Laura filed the complaint that afternoon. It asked the court to determine the parties' rights, prohibit further entry while the dispute was pending, and award the documented costs caused by the fence removal. The claims included trespass and property damage, but Laura kept the language measured. We were not asking a judge to punish an entire neighborhood. We were asking for a boundary to remain undisturbed until the records and competing arguments could be tested. The orange stakes gave the request urgency. At a short conference 3 days later, the HOA agreed not to enter the strip, deliver materials, or alter the post holes before the scheduled evidentiary hearing. The judge entered that agreement as a temporary status quo order. It did not decide ownership. It simply prevented either side from changing the ground while the case moved forward. The order allowed me to maintain the temporary livestock panels, provided I kept them outside Miguel's documented evidence area and preserved every removed fence component. The HOA's answer repeated Dana's central position. The developer had intended a connector, the trail segments on both sides were built to meet it, and occasional landscaping activity along the pasture edge supposedly showed that access had long been accepted. The HOA also argued that my fence had been placed inconsistently with the community plan. Laura separated those points instead of treating them as one claim. A developer's concept did not automatically establish a recorded property interest. A maintenance visit was not the same thing as continuous public trail use. And even if the HOA could prove some limited right, it still had to explain why that right allowed a contractor to remove my fence and occupy a 30-foot strip without notice. Discovery began with document requests, written questions, and subpoenas for the consultant and contractor files. The HOA produced thousands of pages, most of them routine budgets, newsletters, landscaping invoices, and duplicate meeting packets. Laura arranged them by date, while I matched each construction reference against my photographs and expense log. The most important file was not buried in an old box. It was attached to an email Dana had sent to the board 4 months earlier. The attachment was a full resolution version of the preliminary landscape and recreation concept. On Dana's presentation copy, the area near Red Willow Farm had been cropped tightly around the colored trail. The original showed an additional note beside the connector, subject to owner agreement. That was the sentence too faint to read in the county's scanned copy. Metadata and the planning consultant's archived project files confirmed that the note had been present since the concept was created. The consultant explained in writing that the dashed route represented a desired connection, not surveyed ownership. The final subdivision plat omitted it because no agreement with the adjoining farm owner had been completed. The email chain became more damaging as it continued. A former property consultant had reminded Dana that the final plat showed no recorded crossing over Red Willow Farm. She forwarded the question to the HOA's regular counsel. The response recommended obtaining a written license, negotiating a purchase, or redesigning the loop before construction. Dana did not forward that advice to the entire board. Instead, she circulated a shorter update saying, final access coordination was underway. Meeting materials showed that the board had already committed reserve money for the connector and announced it as part of a regional recreation funding application. Dana argued internally that delaying another season would weaken the application and embarrass the association after years of promising a continuous loop. The motive was not mysterious greed. It was pressure, created by a public promise, committed money, and a deadline. But pressure did not manufacture an easement. Evelyn Hart, the board treasurer, answered questions under oath before the hearing. She said Dana had shown directors the cropped trail map and described the corridor as already available to the HOA. Evelyn had approved project expenses, believing the remaining work involved contractor scheduling, not acquiring property rights. If I had seen that owner agreement note, I would have stopped the vote, she said. Other directors began requesting separate advice from the association's litigation attorney. Dana remained president, but she no longer spoke for a united board. Nolan's employer produced the original work order system records directly. The audit history showed Dana's user account adding the 30-foot relocation instruction. Nolan signed a declaration authenticating the crew log, the depth tag sequence, and his question about the missing survey stakes. The company also preserved photographs taken by the crew before drilling. Those images showed my intact cedar fence on the old line only minutes before it was removed. Laura assembled the hearing exhibits in a sequence that followed the conduct itself. My deed and final plat, Miguel's monument survey, the old fence photographs, the work order, the 22 holes, the full planning concept, and the internal warnings. No single page had to carry the entire case. The HOA still had an argument to present. Its attorney planned to call a former maintenance supervisor who claimed workers had occasionally trimmed brush near the eastern edge. Laura expected them to argue that the corridor had been treated as part of the community plan for years. She prepared to distinguish limited maintenance from ownership, trail access, or permission to relocate a working horse fence. The night before the hearing, I checked the temporary panels and found Juniper standing quietly beside them. The orange trail stakes remained beyond her, exactly where the status quo order required them to stay. Laura called while I was locking the barn. "Tomorrow, Dana will call this an innocent correction," she said. "Then Miguel will show the court the post holes." The hearing began with the HOA's attorney describing the connector as the unfinished center of a community trail system. He did not claim the final plat contained an express easement. Instead, he argued that the developer's design, the trail segments built on both sides, and years of limited maintenance activity created a serious question about the parties' rights. He asked the judge to keep the temporary order in place without expanding it while those issues moved toward trial. Laura agreed that the hearing was not a final trial. Then she explained why the existing restraint was too narrow. The HOA had already removed a working livestock fence, drilled 22 holes, ordered gravel, and installed new trail stakes after receiving notice of my claim. Without a preliminary injunction, nothing prevented the board from resuming the project as soon as the short status order expired. Miguel testified first. He identified the recorded survey, the two monuments, and the methods his crew used to retrace the deed description. He explained that my original fence remained inside my property and that the HOA's holes formed a separate 252-foot line 30 feet west of the boundary. Laura displayed his post-hole diagram on the courtroom screen. 22 numbered circles appeared beside the straight boundary line. Each circle corresponded to a field coordinate, a contractor depth tag, and a photograph taken while the soil was fresh. Miguel overlaid the crew sequence on his survey. The result was nearly perfect. The holes remained within 2 inches of the ordered 30-foot offset from one end to the other. "Could ordinary fence repair create that pattern?" Laura asked. "Not accidentally," Miguel answered. The HOA's attorney questioned whether monuments could be disturbed and whether field measurements always contained tolerances. Miguel agreed with both general points. He then explained how he checked the monuments against the recorded calls and surrounding control evidence. The HOA had not produced a competing survey or identified a monument supporting Dana's colored line. Rachel Kim followed with the title chain and recorded instruments. She avoided claiming that her search eliminated every legal theory. Her conclusion was narrower. She found no deed, recorded agreement, or express trail easement granting Saddle Creek Estates the 30-foot strip it had attempted to occupy. The former maintenance supervisor testified for the HOA. He remembered crews trimming brush near the cottonwoods and clearing the subdivision drainage swale several times. Under Laura's questions, he admitted the work occurred from the HOA side, the cedar fence was always present, and he had never seen residents, horses, or maintenance vehicles cross it. There had been no gate connecting the two trail sections. Nolan authenticated the work order and revision history. He confirmed that Dana's account added the instruction to relocate the owner's fence 30 feet west, and told the crew to use the HOA map without an independent survey. His company's photographs showed the intact fence before removal. The numbered tags in those photographs matched the tags beside Miguel's plotted holes. By the time Dana testified, the dispute had narrowed considerably. She said she believed the developer's plan established the corridor and that the board was correcting an old inconsistency. She described the cropped map as a cleaner presentation graphic, not an effort to conceal information. Laura placed the full resolution plan beside Dana's version. The colored route was identical. The difference was the missing margin containing subject to owner agreement. Dana acknowledged receiving the consultant's warning and the recommendation to obtain a license, purchase the strip, or redesign the loop. She said she believed those concerns were overly cautious because the connector had been contemplated for years. When Laura asked her to identify a signed owner agreement, Dana could not. The judge asked whether the board had commissioned title work or requested a certified boundary survey before authorizing construction. Dana said the management company had reviewed the development files, but she could not point to a written title opinion supporting ownership. She also acknowledged that the board never contacted me before the crew arrived. Those answers mattered because they separated a genuine boundary uncertainty from the decision to proceed without resolving one. The HOA could contest legal rights in court, but it had acted first and investigated afterward. The judge ruled from the bench only after reviewing the exhibits during a recess. He emphasized that the decision was preliminary. He was not finally resolving every possible property theory, awarding damages, or deciding the ultimate merits without a full record. But the evidence supported immediate protection. The recorded documents favored my position. The survey tied those documents to established monuments. The work order and postholes showed a deliberate entry 30 feet inside the measured line. Continued construction threatened repeated interference with a working horse facility, while pausing the connector caused the HOA primarily a delay in a recreational project. The preliminary injunction barred the HOA, its contractors, and anyone acting under its direction from entering the disputed strip, placing materials, altering the holes, removing evidence, or performing trail work until further order. I was allowed to maintain the temporary livestock barrier, but not disturb the surveyed evidence area without agreement or court approval. Outside the courtroom, Dana walked past without speaking. Evelyn and 2 other directors remained with the HOA's litigation attorney. Their conversation lasted nearly an hour. The injunction did not restore my fence or pay a single invoice. It did change the board's calculation. Trial would require the HOA to defend the missing owner agreement, the internal warnings, the contractor instructions, and a claim of historic access that its own witness had weakened. Settlement discussions began the following week and continued through 2 formal mediation sessions. Laura presented restoration bids, boarding receipts, canceled training records, Miguel's invoices, title expenses, and legal billing. The HOA initially offered to restore the fence, but wanted permission for a narrower footpath. I refused. A smaller, unauthorized corridor was still an unauthorized corridor. The board eventually authorized a complete resolution over Dana's objection. The consent judgment stated that Saddle Creek Estates held no trail right across the disputed strip and permanently prohibited the association from constructing or promoting a connector over Red Willow Farm. The HOA agreed to remove the orange stakes, correct its maps, restore the fence on the surveyed line, fill and compact the 22 holes, and reseed the damaged pasture. The monetary settlement totaled $47,000, $17,400 for fence restoration, $5,600 for emergency horse care and operational losses, $7,200 for surveying, title, and expert expenses, and $16,800 as a negotiated contribution toward legal costs. I signed only after the restoration specifications named the fence materials, alignment, inspection process, and deadline. The judge entered the consent judgment, turning those promises into enforceable obligations. 3 weeks later, a new contractor positioned the first cedar post beside Miguel's boundary stake. Behind him, the 22 unauthorized holes waited to be filled. Restoration took 6 working days. Miguel marked the original alignment from the same 2 monuments he had used in his survey, and the new contractor set each cedar post several inches inside my property. I watched the first few go in, then let the crew work. This time, every measurement, material, and inspection step had been agreed to in writing. The 22 unauthorized holes required more than loose dirt pushed back with a shovel. The contractor removed broken roots and debris, filled the shafts in compacted layers, and graded the strip so a horse would not step into a soft pocket months later. After Miguel completed his final check, the disturbed ground was seeded with the same pasture mix used elsewhere on the farm. The finished fence ran 252 feet along the recorded line. It looked almost identical to the one that had been removed, except the cedar was brighter and the wire had not yet weathered. I brought the client horses home after the final inspection and removed the temporary panels one section at a time. The settlement payment covered the restoration, emergency boarding and care, operational losses, survey and title expenses, and the agreed contribution toward legal costs. It did not make the disruption disappear, but it kept the HOA's decision from becoming my permanent financial burden. The consent judgment was recorded with the property documents. Saddle Creek Estates removed the saddle loop connector from its maps, grant materials, resident portal, and future amenity plans. The board sent homeowners a correction stating that no trail right existed across Red Willow Farm and that the two subdivision trail segments would remain separate. Rebecca called after the correction reached residents. She said several homeowners had begun asking why the board approved work without a recorded right, but most were relieved that future dues would not fund another boundary fight. Dana was removed as president at a special board meeting after the remaining directors reviewed the warnings she had not shared with them. Evelyn Hart served temporarily while the association adopted a rule requiring title review and a certified survey before any future project near adjoining private property. I did not attend the meeting or celebrate the result. Leadership inside Saddle Creek Estates was their responsibility. The fence and the land were mine. Nolan's company returned the original cedar posts after the case closed. Most were too damaged to reuse, but I kept one numbered depth tag in the metal document box with the survey and consent judgment. It was a small piece of plastic, yet it connected an instruction on a screen to a crew, a drilling sequence, and a line measured on the ground. The first evening the eastern pasture reopened, I rode Juniper along the restored fence. She moved quietly past the new posts and the faint patches where the unauthorized holes had been filled. At the north end, I stopped beside the cottonwoods and looked back toward the two HOA trail segments. They still pointed toward each other, but they ended where the recorded boundary said they ended. The HOA's biggest mistake was not drawing a trail across land it wanted. Plans can be revised, and proposals can be negotiated. Its mistake was believing that moving my fence 30 feet could move the ownership record with it. The Postholes proved otherwise.